Ever find yourself like staring at your bank account and just wishing you had just a little bit more to spend?
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Now imagine trying to run an entire country like that.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Limited resources.
Yeah.
Unlimited wants.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And that's where economic systems come in.
Right.
Today, we're diving deep into how those systems shape our lives,
Yeah.
using all the great articles and research that you sent over.
It's really fascinating how societies all around the world grapple with this fundamental problem of scarcity.
Yeah.
We all have desires, from basic necessities to those luxury items, but the resources to actually fulfill those desires
Right.
are finite.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Right.
Even something as simple as raspberries.
Okay.
When they're in season, they're plentiful and affordable.
Yeah.
But try finding those juicy, ripe raspberries in the dead of winter.
Oh, yeah.
The price skyrockets.
Yeah.
That's scarcity in action.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know from the sources you wanted to kind of explore how different countries tackle this whole scarcity thing, right?
Exactly.
Not everyone approaches it the same way.
Not at all.
Yeah.
We're talking about economic systems.
Okay.
It's like the rules of the game, so to speak.
Okay.
They determine how societies answer three basic questions.
Okay.
What goods and services should we produce? How should we produce them?
Okay.
And who gets to enjoy them?
Right.
And there's a whole spectrum of approaches.
Okay, so it's like choosing your recipe for that raspberry pie.
Yeah.
Some folks might go for a classic, simple recipe, while others might get super fancy with gourmet ingredients.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Think of it as a line.
Okay.
On one end, you have plan economies.
Okay.
That's where the government really takes the lead, making most of the economic decisions.
Right.
From what gets produced to how it's distributed.
Yeah.
On the other end of that spectrum, you have market economies, where individual choices and private businesses drive most of the activity.
So where does Canada fit on this line?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
We're not as hands-off as the U.S.
Right, but we're not exactly a socialist utopia either.
Exactly, you're right.
Yeah.
Canada sits somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
We have what's called a mixed economy.
Okay.
We enjoy a lot of individual freedom and market-driven businesses.
Right.
But our government also plays a significant role, especially in areas like healthcare and education.
Okay.
Remember that last doctor's appointment you had?
Yeah.
No surprise medical bill, right?
It's true.
That's your mixed economy at work.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And speaking of the U.S., they're all about that market economy, right?
They are, yeah.
Let's dive lumper into how that actually plays out in real life.
Absolutely. So think back to that Super Cyborg City game shortage.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how, scalpers were selling limited edition copies?
Oh, yeah.
Double the price? That's a perfect example of supply and demand.
Right.
A core principle of market economies. Limited supply, high demand, prices go up.
Okay.
It's like concert tickets, front row seats.
Yeah.
Always more expensive than those way up in the nosebleed section.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing those long weekend gas price hikes are another example of that same principle in action.
Precisely. Higher demand, limited supply boom, prices go up.
Prices go up.
Now, another key ingredient in a market economy is competition.
Oh.
It's like the Coke versus Pepsi or the Apple versus Microsoft battles.
Right.
These rivalries might seem kind of annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
But they actually benefit you as a consumer.
Okay.
Because they push companies to innovate, improve their products, and keep prices competitive.
So it's like a constant race to win over customers.
It is.
But let's circle back to Canada's mixed economy.
Okay.
I've always been curious about crown corporations.
Yeah.
Why does our government run things like CBC or Canada Post,
Right.
while other industries are left to private businesses?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another important concept.
Okay.
Natural monopolies.
So-
Sometimes it's just more efficient for the government to handle certain services.
Right.
Especially in areas where private companies might not be able to turn a profit.
Right.
Think about Canada Post delivering mail to remote communities.
Yeah. Okay.
It wouldn't make financial sense for a private company to service those areas.
Right.
But as a society, we've decided it's essential.
I see.
So crown corporations step in to fill those gaps.
So they fill in the gaps where private businesses might not venture.
Exactly. It's kind of like the government saying, we'll take care of this essential service.
Right.
Even if it's not the most profitable.
And the CBC is another interesting example, right?
It is.
It plays a vital role in promoting Canadian culture and storytelling.
Yeah.
Something that might not be a top priority for a purely profit-driven media company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, there are always pros and cons to consider.
Right.
Some argue that crown corporations can become inefficient, and they lack the drive to innovate.
Yeah.
That comes with competition.
Okay.
Others point to the privatization of the Alberta Liquor Control Board as an example of how competition can lead to more choices and potentially lower prices.
So the balancing act.
It is.
But I'm guessing there are times when this balancing act gets really tense.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to workers' rights.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. What happens when hospital workers go on strike?
Right.
It's a critical situation.
Yeah, it is.
It highlights the sometimes conflicting interests of workers and employers.
Right.
That's where labor unions come in.
Exactly.
Right. They're like the voice of the workers, advocating for better wages, safer working conditions, benefits.
Exactly. They provide a collective bargaining power that individual workers often lack. It's thanks to labor unions and those hard-fought battles that we no longer have to worry about things like child labor in dangerous industries.
Right.
Remember those images of kids working in coal mines?
Right.
Thank goodness those days are largely behind us.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget how far we've come in terms of worker protection.
It is.
But this tension between workers and employers isn't going away anytime soon, is it?
You're right. And just recently, there was a landmark Supreme Court decision in Canada that really shook things up. The court affirmed the right to collective bargaining as a fundamental freedom. This means the government can't just step in and dismantle negotiated agreements between unions and employers.
Wow.
It's a huge win for workers. And it's going to have a lasting impact on how labor relations play out in Canada.
So it's a big deal.
It is.
Basically saying that workers have a right to negotiate collectively.
They do.
And the government can't just brush that aside.
Exactly.
But before we get too deep into that case, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about this whole spectrum of economic systems.
Sure. It certainly is a significant decision with far-reaching implications. It raises all sorts of questions about the balance of power between workers, employers, and the government.
Okay, so back to that spectrum.
Okay.
If we've got planned economies on one end and market economies on the other, where would you say you fall?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that's a question everyone needs to kind of grapple with.
Right.
It really boils down to your values and priorities.
Okay.
Do you prioritize individual freedom and economic efficiency?
Okay.
Or do you lean more towards social safety nets and government intervention to ensure everyone has access to those essential services?
Right.
There's no right or wrong answer, but it's something to think about.
Yeah. It's like choosing your own adventure in a way.
Yeah, it is.
Speaking of choices, I was intrigued by that article about Canadian filmmakers.
Yeah.
It sounds like making movies here in Canada is a constant uphill battle.
It definitely presents some unique challenges.
Yeah.
Canada has a relatively small domestic market compared to giants like the U.S., making it tougher for filmmakers to recoup their investments and turn a profit. That's where government support through organizations like Telefilm Canada comes into play.
Right. I read that Telefilm provides funding and resources to help Canadian filmmakers kind of tell their stories and showcase our unique perspectives.
Exactly.
It's like giving them a boost to get their projects off the ground.
Precisely.
But this government support isn't without its critics.
It's not, no.
Some argue that it can stifle creativity and lead to a reliance on funding rather than focusing on market demand.
Yeah.
They suggest it might even create an unfair advantage, making it harder for independent filmmakers to compete.
Right.
So it's a trade-off.
It is.
Supporting Canadian stories versus fostering a truly competitive market. It's a tough call.
It is.
I mean, who else is going to tell those quirky, uniquely Canadian stories? If not our own filmmakers.
Exactly.
Think about it. Would a Hollywood studio ever produce a film
Probably not.
about the joys of poutine?
I don't think so.
Or the drama of a small-town curling championship?
It's a valid point.
Yeah.
And the successes of films like Moccasin Flats, which explored the lives of Indigenous youth in Regina, and Caraboonie, a documentary about the challenges of French-speaking immigrants in Western Canada, really highlight the value of these uniquely Canadian stories. They likely wouldn't have been made without government support.
Those sound like powerful films that offer valuable insights into Canadian society.
They are.
It's making me think about that historical epic, Passchendaele. That movie wouldn't have happened without government funding.
You're right. Passchendaele is a great example.
Yeah.
It brought a pivotal moment in Canadian history to life,
Right.
preserving our heritage
Yeah.
and reminding us of the sacrifices made during World War I.
But I can also see the other side of the argument.
Right.
If filmmakers become too reliant on government funding, does it stifle their drive to connect with audiences
Right.
and create commercially successful films?
Yeah.
It's a tricky balance.
It certainly is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot between supporting Canadian storytelling and fostering a sustainable film industry that can compete on a global scale.
This whole conversation reminds me of that Hershey factory closure in Smith Falls.
Oh, yeah.
What a blow to that community.
It was.
It really brought home the impact of economic decisions on real people's lives.
That was a difficult situation.
Yeah.
The Hershey company decided to shift production to Mexico, where labor costs were lower and the impact on Smith Falls was devastating.
Yeah.
It raises important questions about globalization and the role of government in protecting jobs and communities in a rapidly changing economic landscape.
Right. It's easy to talk about market forces in the abstract.
It is.
But when a major employer shuts down, it has a ripple effect that's felt throughout the entire community.
It does.
I imagine there were some heated discussions
I'm sure there were.
about what the government could or should have done.
Absolutely. Some argued that the government should have intervened, perhaps by offering incentives for Hershey to stay or investing in retraining programs for the displaced workers. Others felt that the government should focus on attracting new businesses to the area, diversifying the local economy to make it more resilient.
It's a tough situation.
It is.
You want to protect jobs and support communities.
You do?
But you also don't want to stifle business growth or discourage investment.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. The Hershey case also shines a light on the role of labor unions. In situations like this, unions can advocate for their members, negotiating severance packages, retraining opportunities, and support during that transition.
They're there to protect the workers.
They are.
Making sure their voices are heard. It makes me think back to that Supreme Court decision we were talking about earlier. That ruling gives unions a lot more leverage in these kinds of situations.
It certainly does.
Yeah?
The Supreme Court's affirmation of the right to collective bargaining
Right.
strengthens the position of unions when negotiating with employers, especially during times of economic upheaval.
Don't some people argue that unions can be too powerful?
They do.
Yeah, I've heard concerns about them driving up costs and making businesses less competitive.
There are definitely differing views on the role of unions in a modern economy.
Yeah.
Some see them as essential for protecting workers' rights and ensuring fair wages,
Right.
especially as automation and globalization continue to reshape the workforce.
Right.
Others argue that unions can hinder economic growth and make it harder for businesses to adapt to changing market conditions.
So it's another one of those complex issues with no easy answers.
It is.
It makes me think back to that healthcare workers strike in Saskatchewan back in 2007.
Oh, yeah.
Essential services were disrupted. Surgeries were postponed. And it really put a strain on the entire healthcare system.
That strike brought to the forefront the tension between workers' demands for better wages and working conditions. And the government's responsibility to ensure that those essential services are maintained. It became a public debate about priorities and the role of collective bargaining in those essential sectors.
It wasn't just about the workers and their employer. It was about the patients who relied on those services.
Exactly.
It must have been incredibly stressful for everyone involved.
It was a high-stakes situation for sure.
Yeah.
And the Saskatchewan government ultimately decided not to intervene directly. They chose not to enact back-to-work legislation. Opting instead to let the negotiations play out between the union and the healthcare authority.
That was a bold move.
It was.
It shows that they were willing to let the collective bargaining process run its course.
They were.
Even though it meant disruptions to those essential services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It highlights the complex considerations that governments face when balancing those competing interests in a mixed economy.
It seems like every example we've talked about kind of leads back to this idea of balance.
It does.
Balancing the needs of workers and employers, individual freedoms and government intervention. economic growth and social well-being. It's a lot to juggle.
It definitely highlights the complexity of economic systems.
Yeah.
There's rarely a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works in one context might not be suitable for another.
Right.
And what might seem like a good idea in theory can have unintended consequences in practice.
Like that Supreme Court case we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The one that affirmed the right to collective bargaining.
Right.
It was a victory for workers' rights.
It was.
But I imagine some businesses weren't too thrilled about it.
You're right. That decision stemmed from a case in British Columbia
where
the government tried to cut costs in the healthcare system by essentially tearing up existing contracts with healthcare workers.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court basically said, hold on, you can't just do that.
Right.
They declared that collective bargaining is a fundamental right protected by the Charter.
That's a big deal.
It is.
It seems like it shifts the power dynamic quite a bit.
It does.
Giving unions a stronger voice at the negotiating table.
It does, and it has sparked ongoing debates about the appropriate role of government in labor relations.
Right.
The potential impact on business competitiveness.
Yeah.
And the overall balance between economic efficiency and social justice.
It makes you wonder, are there any jobs that are truly secure?
That's a valid concern.
In this constantly evolving economic landscape.
It's no longer a world where you could expect to work for the same company for your entire career.
Right.
Adaptability and a willingness to learn new skills are becoming more and more important.
Yeah.
But even beyond specific jobs, I think this deep dive has really highlighted how economic forces shape so many aspects of our lives.
Right.
From the price of raspberries at the grocery store to the availability of healthcare and the types of movies being produced.
It's true. We might not always think about it consciously.
Right.
But these systems are constantly at play.
They are.
Influencing the choices we make and the opportunities available to us.
And that brings us back to the importance of being informed.
Yeah.
The more you understand about how these economic systems work, the better equipped you'll be to navigate them. Make informed decisions, and even advocate for changes that align with your values.
It's like we've been given a map and a compass.
Yeah.
And now we can start exploring this economic landscape with a little more confidence and understanding.
Exactly, whether you lean towards more government intervention or prefer a more free market approach. The key is to engage thoughtfully and critically with the systems that shape our lives.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
I agree.
From scarcity and supply and demand to crown corporations and the power of collective bargaining.
We did.
It's been a fascinating journey.
I agree, and hopefully it's sparked some curiosity and given you some new insights to ponder as you continue to navigate the complexities of the economic world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to keep asking questions.
Yes.
Challenging assumptions. And exploring different perspectives.
Absolutely.
Remember, there's always more to learn.
There is.
And your understanding of these systems can empower you to make a positive impact.
It can.
And if you want to keep the conversation going, be sure to connect with us on social media using the hashtag #TheDeepDive.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Until next time, happy diving.